When I first met Edgar years ago, he was a consultant for one of the major local banks. We were working together on packaging big data technology and data science for that bank. And one of the most compelling discussions I had with him was on the topic of fraud and financial crimes. I also had a background in fraud and surveillance from my own banking expertise, and I've kept Edgar in mind whenever the topic came up. Welcome to Data Ethics Conversations. Today we talk to Edgar Angeles, IT expert, financial consultant, and entrepreneur. We will talk to Edgar about the topic of data driven fraud and using data to fight fraud. With most of our day to day transactions migrating online during this pandemic, the topic of cybercrime and fraud is more relevant now than ever. If you enjoyed this conversation, please like us on Facebook, subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Twitter at EthicsPH, and on LinkedIn at DataEthicsPH. And now, my conversation with Edgar Angeles.
Yes. Welcome, Edgar, to our podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, Doc. It's great to be here.
Yeah, and I think you have a very interesting topic that you want to talk about that our audience would be very interested in. But maybe before that, give us maybe a quick background on what you've done. You've done a lot of work, even before IT. So maybe share a little bit about your story, and what brought you to this point.
Okay, thank you, Doc. But I don't want to bore anyone. But basically, I started my career in a oil company, so with Shell, and I started my initial, I would say, stuff on the technology side on that part. And I've been there for quite a while, and I've learned so much. And I didn't really realize that I'll be going to banking, because when I started going to banking, the first interview was literally zero. They basically are asking me about the debits and the credits, while the one on the top of my mind is the viscosity level of a lubricant. So it's a totally different, I would say, medium, so to speak. But fundamentally, looking back, I've learned so much, because those things that we've learned in the past pretty much shape where we are at this point in time now. So I've been with Shell, and also I've been a good number of years with a Dutch bank called ABN AMRO. That's why some of my colleagues were saying, how come you always work with a Dutch company?
Yeah, what's with Netherlands, bro?
Well, apart from their red district in Amsterdam, so it's really it's really more of the culture of Dutch. Somehow, I'm pretty much amazed. These people are, I would say, down to earth folks with good sense of humor, and you can learn a lot from them. And I had an opportunity of working in Amsterdam for a few years with Shell, and I've seen a big difference of talking to a Dutch guy. Maybe I'm a little bit biased on this, but talking to a Dutch guy as compared to someone in France, right? But I mean, I have a lot of respect with my Dutch friends and colleagues, and to be quite candid, I've learned a lot from them. But after working with those two institutions, I managed to go to some other, uh, I would say, corporate, like Reuters, and then later on Thomson Reuters, primarily on the financial side of things. And those basically started my career. But recently, I mean, I think it was 3 years ago, I was invited to go to California to basically, uh, you know, studied some, they called it executive management program. And I was fortunate enough to be part of this group called Lead Innovation Group from Stanford. And I was also invited to join their what we call the incubation or bootstrap incubation program, which specifically intended for technology startups
Wow. So
for
was
emerging
that
markets.
in Silicon Valley? You said
Yes,
Stanford. Wow,
yes,
amazing.
yes. So in fact, I was not when I joined them. I was thinking of, because I've been working for more than a good number of years in the corporate world. When they invited me, I'm a little bit, I would say, late bloomer, so to speak, because I was the oldest amongst the 20-year-olds folks there. And you can imagine I can bring a wealth of experience coming to the corporate domain, right? But when I started having this conversation with these young folks, that basically blew out my mind. There's a lot of things I realized that I still need to learn from. And in fact, I may borrow this word coming from a certain person, which I forgot his name. That one of the things that I've learned is that there's so many things I still have to learn, and that's where we are. And basically, I was part of some initiatives on the startup, but some actually didn't fly, and one of them is still work in progress. So hopefully, it will be in a very good positions later on. And the pandemic year, as we all know it, 2020, is something that is very interesting because that opens up a lot of opportunity. Apart from all the negative things that's happening, one of the things I realized is that there's so many things that you can do, and podcast is one of them. So
Yeah,
I
I was a guest on one of your podcasts. No?
yeah,
Maybe maybe talk a little bit about that. No?
yeah, thank you for accommodating me at least on that podcast. Well, I started that. Actually, I envisioned that podcast, to be quite honest, 4 years ago. But since we're pretty much occupied with this corporate organization, though I really don't have time to start it off. But it's still on the back of my mind until last year. No? And last year was pretty much and it's idle state. You're just staring at the ceiling, counting the all those lizards there. And by opening certain switch of the room, they realize, hey, podcast seems to be the right thing to do at this point in time. And podcast is not really new. It's been there for quite a while. The only thing is that I've done my research as well. In the US and Europe, podcast is pretty familiar, right? Almost, I would categorically say, based on recent stats, more than 60% of people listen to podcasts. Now, the likes of Asia, it's a little bit different because in Asia, we're pretty much diverse. So if you look at the China thing, you need to learn how to speak Mandarin, right? Even in our own Asian neighbors, the Thai have their own way of uh,
Yeah.
speaking
There's
their own
no
language. Yeah?
universal Asian language.
Right. And
Yeah.
the other thing is in Asia, in Malay, I realized that Indonesia and Philippines have similar root word, which is the Malay. Yeah. So this is something interesting. And podcast is a very promising thing. But, in Asia, we can only count on our fingers how many podcasts, particularly technology and fintech podcasts, that is basically running prominently in Asia Pacific. So I can only count on my fingers. I said maybe this is the right time to have this. And a lot of our colleagues, some of them are of having their own startup, would like to have some channels wherein they can promote their products or services. Yeah, and basically have a medium where they can share their experiences and so on. And that's why I started it off. And
Yeah, I learned a lot from you because we were doing data ethics just to share our experience as early as 2019,
mhm,
late 2019, as a meetup group. No, we started a
right,
meetup group
right,
because in the same way that you feel that there weren't enough like tech podcasts, we felt that there
absolutely,
weren't enough meetup groups talking about a particular theme, which is the ethical use of data and kind of the challenges. So it started as a meetup group, and then obviously with COVID, that came to a very quick end. But we took a chance and migrated the meetup online. No, so we
mm,
had our. It's almost been, it's been a year. Our first online meetup was circa March, talking about the pandemic.
right,
It's quickly followed followed in quick succession, and then now, because a meetup recorded meetup is still not quite like a podcast because
right,
it's
right,
quite
absolutely, yeah,
sometimes it can be chaotic. You have questions from the audience. You never know what to expect. So now, it seems to be going well. I've adopted the more podcast format where usually it's one on one, although from time to time I have like more than one guest, and
mm,
it's there is some structure. I mean, I leave it to the guests, so in the same way I leave it to you later
mm,
to kind of bring the conversation. I find
Right.
it more, I would say, illuminating as a medium, because you get to have real conversations with the people. And I think that's the miracle of the kind of the technologies we have now. Now all these recording devices,
Mm,
where you can watch and or listen to podcasts.
mm,
Rarely do you hear this kind of quality of conversations anymore. No,
mm.
gone are the heydays of the radio shows where people actually have these chats. Some are still there, but nothing about the topic of data or technology hasn't been around. No? So yeah, I'm totally on board with you on that.
Yeah, I think podcast is it's one of the things that will be very promising moving forward. But it's also challenging in a way because one of the things I've noticed, because I was looking at the statistics I have, most of the millennials are more into the videos and the YouTube, right? And if you're describing something, at least on the YouTube, you can easily show it, right? This is how it looks like. The pencil looks like this. But in a podcast, you really have to describe it. This is 1 centimeter long with the color of orange, and then you can let your people imagine what you're
Yeah,
talking
the
about.
imagination will take them through. Actually, that is a consideration, because although we've been quite successful with kind of migrating the meetup online, and now it's kind of a podcast, it's still
Mm,
in a way a video format. So we have people who will share slides, or but like a true podcast itself, you don't even need slides. People just banter and discuss.
yeah.
So we may get to that point very, very quickly. In fact, some of the more recent conversations I've had were completely without slides. We just went online and had a chat about their particular specialty, and it still worked out pretty well. So I guess we'll play it by ear from this point. No, the response to the data ethics conversations has been very positive, and then again, it echoes what you said, that there aren't enough of these conversations happening. So hopefully we can, start a trend and continue to kind of collaborate, between
Yep.
between our
Yep.
mediums. No?
Absolutely. Yeah. Looking forward to that collaboration. So, do I need to share the slide deck, or what do you prefer on this?
Okay. So you said you wanted to discuss a very interesting topic on digital fraud. You can share your slides if you wish, so you can control it.
Okay. All right. Well, my topic is actually something that I would say people are familiar with in a way because of the news and so on, right? Correct. Yeah. Well, the topic is about digital banking fraud, and it's actually, when you basically asked me to be part of this wonderful program, Doc, is that one of the things that's running on my mind is that uh, after the pandemic came along, is that we are now more used to a digital thing, right? I mean, before that, I would say only a handful of people are doing digital activities, but nowadays it's more than a good number, right? More than even probably majority of us are doing this kind of digital thing. But apart from that activity, there's a lot of risk as well that comes along with it. Yeah, and the title digital banking is actually right pretty much vague because if you look at it, this is a subset of financial fraud in a way, right? But I would like to emphasize digital banking because I'll be presenting some case studies. This case study is not really a secret. These are things that you can get from the news. So I had an opportunity of just collecting this information so that we can hopefully learn something from it, right? So as I've said, digital banking fraud is something that's a subset of financial fraud. And going to this, maybe I'll need to set or probably put some proper context first so that we'll have an idea where we are. All right. So if you notice, it's pretty much in red. It's not because Chinese New Year has just been recently, but there's a purpose why we have chosen the color red. Because it's pretty staggering. Based on the financial crime statistics, this is a global survey that was conducted by a very reputable company, PwC. They said that they have surveyed global organizations for this one, and for the past 24 months, they said that they had experienced some fraud of some shapes and form. Okay, for the past 24 months, this is around 47%. And according to them, this is the second highest reported level of incident in the past 20 years. So you can imagine now we're 2021, since 1991, right? So this is a very significant number if you look at it that way.
Is this 47% of customers
Yes,
experience fraud in the last 2 years? That's like 1 out of 2 people.
exactly. So, and then out of this, they were saying in average, around 6 incidents of fraud for these companies. Again, these companies are a diverse organization, and we will go to the next slide after this that describes that. They said that they have reportedly experienced 6 incidents in the last 24 months. Okay, again, from an outsider, this is again a very interesting information, right? And amongst these incidents of fraud, there are, of course, when you go to Google something, you always look for the best of, right? The top Netflix series, for instance. Amongst these statistics, of course, you always look at what are the most prominent or the 4 types of fraud based on these numbers, right? And number one, again, if you look at it, is customer fraud. I was looking at it, and customer fraud, by definition, is defined as a deceptive business practices, no, that cause consumers to suffer financial or other losses. By description, that's what it means. And number two is cybercrime, which is pretty normal, especially during the pandemic era. People are now pushed towards the digital channel, and therefore, most of these fraudsters are now also moving to that channel, right? And number three is this what we call asset misappropriation. Well, when I initially look at this, I said, "What is asset misappropriation?" It's a little bit a very vague statement as well, but it was defined as company or a client assets that is being used for personal gain, right? And categorically, it means that you can either use it in cash or non-cash. Right?
This
So
is different from outright parang theft.
no, yeah, it's different. It's different. So this is more of in a company context, having this using certain assets, either cash or non-cash, for your own personal gain. So that's what it means. And then, of course, the most popular one, the current administration are promoting the advocacy, right, for this, right? Bribery and corruption. So this is a common thing. And I think we all know the story behind that. Right? Going to the next slide, this is very, very interesting. The next slide basically describes the previous slide that I have mentioned. They have divided it, according to PwC, they have divided it into 7 pillars, right? In terms of industries. So you have their consumer markets, you have energy, utilities, and resources, then financial services from where we belong once upon a time, right? And government and public sector, and then the most prominent one, the health industries, right, that also impacted, as well as the industrial products or manufacturing, plus the technology, media, and telecom. So they divided it into different pillars. And based on that survey, they realized this is what they've got, right, for the past 2 years. No? So in the consumer market, you will notice that customer fraud is the most dominant one, right? Followed by asset misappropriation, and cybercrime is on the third most.
When you say
Now,
customer fraud, this is fraud done to customers or done by customers?
well, it can be both, right? I mean, for the customer fraud itself, it can be done by the customer, or they can do it also for other people, right? So it's a dual thing, so to speak. So, and consumer markets, as we all know, it's pretty much predominantly consumers, right? So, and that's one of the things, that deceptive business practices is essentially a number one fraudulent activities on this particular industry. Now, going to the energy and utilities and resources, you will see that there's a change of face, right? Bribery and corruption is number one. I used to work with an oil industry doc, and to be honest, I was during my first year, I was assigned in the province, and in the province, the LGUs have a different dynamics, right? So, if there is what we call fiesta, they will go to you to basically sponsor, right? And also, if you would like to, during that time, Shell is very popular on motocross, right?
Right.
And motocross has a lot of marketing stuff like shirts, free, what do you call that, oil, lubricants. And then we have jackets with Shell logo, right? And all of those LGU will be asking you, hey, do you have jackets with the logo and so on and so forth. So, and not only that, all those little stuff uh, becomes normal to them, getting something in for some
Getting
Philippines.
a freebie or getting a giveaway,
Exactly.
swag.
And, that was what, more than, 15 years ago, 16 years ago. So looking back, and this particular survey was done just last year, right? I mean, you realize that still bribery and corruption is number one on this industry. So nothing has changed, to be honest. And then number two, asset misappropriation, which is similar to the consumer market industry, right? And the third one, which is not also new, accounting, financial, and statement fraud. So again, you will see the numbers are, it's not really going far from each other. It's just 1% higher than the other and 3% lower than the other. Now, let's go to the most, I would say, important industry, which is financial services. This includes the banking sector, from where we belong once upon a time. So you can see on the banking sector, customer fraud is also number one. Yeah. So people who are essentially taking loans and so on and giving some other names, blah, 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 and this kinds of stuff. But number two for banking or financial services is the cybercrime. And it's pretty obvious because banking are now going to the digital bandwagon. And that's why at least some of the fraudsters are also going to that channel. It's like changing channels from you previously watched CNN, you're now in BBC. So the fraudster is now going to BBC because people are watching it more than the CNN, for instance. So cybercrime is also growing in that sense, and they're number two with it for the financial services. But number three is accounting and financial statement fraud, which is, once we go to the case study later on, you will be able to realize, this is right. Yeah. Of course, the government industry or the public sector is not spared. But I was surprised. The cybercrime is number one.
I think I'm not. Although this is a global survey, no, but
Yeah, yeah.
well, for example, if I don't think I'd be. People will disagree when I say our government, specifically Philippines, no, our
Mhm.
government's cyber posture has never been in a good shape. We have a lot of unsecure government websites.
Mhm.
We've had a number of high-profile hacks. If you remember the Comelec, and then there was this AFP hack also, where all the training records of the AFP were exfiltrated. But the reason isn't because we have very sophisticated hackers, no? Usually these are, there's a term for them, yung mga script kiddies, no? So people who are not necessarily highly technical, but what they do is they download a lot of these automated tools maybe they've obtained from yung mga forums or mga dark
Mhm.
web.
Mhm.
And the tools do the work, no? But the problem lang is, particularly in government, the websites are just designed very poorly, or there's no sense of data security or
Right.
confidentiality. Like in the AFP case, and this is quoted in the news.
Mhm.
Basically, the data was put in plain text, no, on the website, so you can easily just get it, and it had training records, it had assignments, you
Mhm.
had people who had job titles like master interrogator, and even undercover assignments were found there. And then, I mean, to be sure, the data is not brand new. It's pretty outdated. In fact, that was the main defense of the AFP when it came out, is that it's outdated data. But outdated doesn't mean wrong, right? You have birthdays on it, you have training records on it, and most importantly, maybe some of those assignments may still be current. No, lalo na if you're dealing with people who are in, let's say, they're on a mission somewhere in, you know, I'm just think out loud. Maybe they're in an area with a lot of armed conflict, like Holo or Marawi, and their
Yeah.
details are there. And now you can if you also if you're the hacker who also happen to have the Comileak data set, you can now connect the two and look at, okay, Edgar, who's a master interrogator, I wonder where he lives because the Comileak data set gives you the precinct of where Edgar voted, and Edgar's family and Edgar's relatives, and
Right, right.
I
But
mean, it's just disgusting, to be honest, how badly some of our websites are built.
yeah, I think you're right because when this survey was done, this is really more of a global context, right? So you can see, of course, those the first world countries, they're pretty much on the digital bandwagon already. But if you compare it with the third world, it's an entirely different thing, right? So, but I think majorities are still, I would say, categorically on that particular level. So that's why when they done this survey, the cybercrime is number one, at least for this particular industry. And then number two for this is accounting, and then bribery and corruption, which is pretty interesting because in the context, not only for the Philippines specifically, but in Asia, the bribery and corruption on this industry is number one. We'll go through that later on. There's some statistics relative to that. And then, of course, for the most prominent industries nowadays, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the health industry, they were not also spared. But cybercrime again is number one here for the health industries. Accounting and financial is number two, and customer fraud falls on the third category. The other two industries, industrial manufacturing, yeah, I think we have a lot of that here, particularly in Asia. Uh, you'll be, well, I was not surprised on this, but asset misappropriation is one of the most, I would say, fraud thing that happens to them, right? Followed by cybercrime and then bribery and corruption. Then going to the technology, media, and comms, cybercrime is number one. Accounting, number two, followed by customer fraud. Now I'm gonna jump into the first case study, Doc, if you want mine, and
Yeah, go
then
ahead, please.
let's go. Anyway, these are information that's also available publicly. So this is something that we can hopefully learn something from. Right? Okay, so Tesco, right? So if you look at Tesco, basically, Tesco is a
Tesco is
big,
the retail
yes,
supermarket.
yes,
Yeah, okay.
yes, it's a big supermarket group in the UK, and they're pretty much like the likes of, in our case, SNR, right? Something like that, the big one. And what happened was, when their supermarket retail group significantly have, growth in terms of cash, they decided to create a bank, right? Which is, I think, a very good direction to go to. However, in 2016, November specifically, the bank, which is owned by the UK supermarket group, Tesco, they basically had what we call online security breach. And this is based on the report. They basically have lost more or less indicatively at about 2.5 million British pounds sterling, right? On their, there's 100,000 accounts, but they also discovered an additional of 20,000 more. And the scenario is this particular fraudulent activity happened over a weekend where the bank staff were not there. No? And in fact, during the official or formal investigation, there's no official explanation on exactly what happened, on how is this theft executed. But during the initial investigation, the expert, this forensic expert, this said that the hackers managed to identify weaknesses, right, on the Tesco Bank website, and obviously exploited it and steal thousands of customer account details to make online purchases. Of course, the typical reaction of the bank and also Tesco as a group is to block online payments, right? But they can still continue to use cards, cash withdrawals. In UK, there's what we call chip and pin. This is more of a UK local financial transactions. And of course, bill payment is also the same thing that we do here. But this is a classic example of, I would say, a fraudulent thing, because there is a lot of vulnerabilities, let's put it that way, that most of these organizations, particularly banks, are, they normally take it for granted. Uh, the the typical, update of patches, for instance, right? Those software applications, they normally send you updates, but for some reason, they're not implementing it, either because they don't have a staff, or probably they're always online. I encountered this problem when I was working in the bank previously, wherein the only window of opportunity for us to do an update or patch update is from 12 midnight up to around 5 a.m. Why is that? Because the normal bank opens at 9 a.m., right? And the end of day, depending on how huge the bank is, will run for several hours. And then after running that end of day process, they will create reports, which will take another 2 to 3 hours or so. So the only opportunity you have is that window, 12 to 5. And sometimes, that window of opportunity is also, if something happened, like an error pops up on the screen, then the whole process stops. They need to find what the error is. And those are the heydays, right? The traditional way of doing things. And the good thing nowadays is that most of this has been basically transpired or overhauled, so to speak, and transformed to a much better, efficient way of doing things. So, but yeah, this thing is quite interesting. You have comments on this, Doc?
No, I think this is for me, although it's an older use case, uh I wouldn't be surprised if it starts happening just as the local supermarkets start digitizing. One thing
Yeah.
that we can expect, for example, in the Philippines is our digital posture is maybe 5 to 10 years behind what's happening in the US and the UK. So we haven't had time to experience it and in a way learn from it. I think our banks have started to improve, local banks, in terms of their usage of, for example, chip-based ATM cards, and now we're using relatively newer ATM machines. There was a time when I won't say which, but some local banks are actually using second-hand ATMs.
Yeah.
They were importing that, and the operating systems were outdated, like Windows XP or something, really old operating systems, and they could easily be compromised. And of course, it took a while for our local banks to shift to chip ATM cards, because that was an
Right.
expensive investment. No? You have to change the machines, change everything.
True.
But it's these mag stripes that are getting skimmed all the time. No, so I
Yeah.
guess at some point maybe the cost of the fraud was just too much,
Mm.
and then they shifted. But guess what? All our supermarkets, they all have their loyalty card systems,
Mhm. Mhm.
mobile apps. So
Right.
they're in, and now they've been forced to go digital because of the pandemic. I have wouldn't be surprised if people haven't actually figured out, the ins and outs of digital payments, and then suddenly they're forced into it. That's just a recipe for a lot of problems to occur. No?
Right. I remember what you said, because I was responsible for buying ATM machines during those time, and we normally called it refurbished equipments,
Exactly.
half the price. Sometimes I managed to get a buy one take one
I'm
from.
sure I'm sure our viewers would be shocked to know that many of the ATMs that these banks use are actually secondhand ATMs. I mean, just the
Oh yes,
idea of
yes,
it.
exactly, and it's an economic factor, right? That I think we need to take into account. So for as long as it's working and it's secured, I think there's nothing wrong with it. Anyway, going to the next slide. Okay. Okay, this is interesting because this is close to home. This category is more of economic crime or financial crime, as they call it, in the Philippines. And the good thing is that they just compared the post-pandemic and the pandemic years, right? And 2018 is a pre-pandemic year.
Like, wow,
And
look at that cybercrime jump. That's
yes,
that's the
yes,
biggest,
yes.
no? No more than
right? But
doubled.
yeah, for Philippine context is concerned, the asset misappropriation still pops up, right? If you look at it, and of course, 52%. It's a little bit lower in 2020, but 2018 is really significant. But the bribery and corruption and customer fraud is almost equal for the year. And I think I fully agree with what you said. Cybercrime from 9% to 19% for the pandemic year, right? 2020. And what else which is interesting here? Oh, yeah. Well, deceptive business practices at 38%. Well, I think, one of the interpretations of my colleague here, because during the pandemic, we basically lost some of the other channel of activities, right? And I think we all know that's why some of the business closed down, and as well as the deceptive business practices, right? So somewhat it correlates to that. But again, those folks decided to transfer to another medium, which is a digital thing. So that's why you have a significant jump into the cybercrime stuff. Interesting, isn't it? Okay, moving to the next case study. Right. Okay, so I managed to put three entities or institutions here, but actually there are four. But I decided to skip off the other one because from the Philippine context, these are the three major players for this particular case study. Of course, you can see here the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, Bangladesh Bank, which is categorically a regulator, a central bank himself, and RCBC, a universal bank based in the Philippines. And I think the story behind this is very controversial, right? So not everyone is aware that this is a particular cyber heist attempted to basically get the 951 million US dollars from the Bangladesh Central Bank, right? So early 2016, some of these hackers, so to speak, penetrated the security system of the Bangladesh Bank, and they basically what do you call this? Roll out or infect them with malware that basically cloned a legitimate transaction. So on the 4th of February of that year, that malware sent 35 withdrawal requests through SWIFT, right? And they basically requested New York Federal Reserve, where the Bangladesh Central Bank had money on deposit. And these fraudsters are clever enough to steal a total of those 951 million US dollars, which is 30 of those orders worth 850 million were basically blocked by the New York Fed. But these folks succeeded to have the 101 million US dollars, and they transferred it to the banks in Colombo, in Sri Lanka, and the Philippines.
If I can interject here, no,
Sure.
and this is perfectly public information, so we're not
Absolutely.
really revealing anything new, anything that you won't be able to find online.
Mm.
I'm still perplexed, no, because I remember at the height of it, the they were pinning down the blame on a branch manager, no, in RCBC.
Yep.
And yeah, for all we know, the branch manager is complicit, because I think that would have been the way the money would be siphoned out of RCBC, through that branch.
Right.
But I'm still perplexed that if you get like 101 million remittance, that people wouldn't be talking about it. I mean, I know that isn't it the suspicious transaction limit is around $10,000, so
Right.
half a million pesos, no. And here you're talking 100 million coming through your, I don't know, where does this come from, the Swift system, no. And
Yeah.
then, I mean, dun pa lang eh. Whether it looks legit or not. I mean, a single
Something
remittance.
unusual is, di ba?
Yeah,
Something
yeah.
unusual.
And so again, it's just something that boggles me that they either they thought it was normal, and I would be, I guess, questioning why that would feel normal to them, or second, And again, I'm not accusing anyone. There could be more than meets the eye here in terms of people
Yeah.
who are
Yeah.
complicit, no. And again, parang level up ka, no. You stole money from a central bank. It's not just. I mean, it's one thing to steal money from a bank, but but you sell it. You actually stole it from a sovereign, a sovereign
Sovereign
entity.
authority. Oh,
So yeah, I mean, and it was done through by you said by a malware, no?
yes.
If I remember correctly, parang there was the malware code was embedded in hardware yata or something that and they were trying to trace. Again, I'm fuzzy on the exact details, no? Parang it was being traced to malware that was pre-installed into the system, and that allowed them to basically take over the Swift codes, no, or the Swift system.
Mm.
Wow, that's pretty deep in, for for you to do something like that, no?
No, actually, that one, I'm familiar with it because I've seen a malware of that nature. What happens is they, like what has been mentioned, it cloned a legitimate transaction. And you know what happens is that there's a security check on this core banking every now and then, right? Apart from the Swift authentication procedures. Now, the thing is, uh, core banking also have their, what do you call it, exit holes, right? So they call it sundry accounts. And sometimes that goes there. There's only a time period where it captures that information. And then at the end of the day, they clear that out, right? So that's how it works. Now, the thing is, the malware basically cloned it as another legitimate transaction. And that's why, and I think there's a time period involved. So during the security check, it's something like, the security guard goes to the premises since it's a banking day. They won't basically make a suspicion that you are a fraudulent guy, right? Because you're coming into the bank during daytime, wearing your tux and ties, right? And probably a what do you call it? A very expensive watch. The guards will just say, everything is normal. And then I think that's what the malware is doing. Now, by the way, to correct the information, Doc, the 20 million US dollars goes to the Sri Lankan bank, and what goes to the local bank, the RCBC, is only 81 million US
Yeah,
dollars.
just $81 million. No sweat.
No, the thing is, it was been withdrawn. Uh, the cash has been withdrawn to the branch, and that's the very interesting part, right? So
What's 81 million? Isn't that like four? I mean, if I get my math right, no, it's like 4 billion, 4 billion
something like
pesos. It's just 4 billion
something.
pesos. I mean, something. It's completely normal. It's something that we would never suspect. But grab.
And during the investigation, because there's a lot of investigators that basically jump into this particular case, including FBI and all of those prominent ones. They realized that this particular fraudsters or gang of fraudsters are basically between 20 to 40 members, and their skills, you can imagine, are all financial and banking experts and hackers and software engineers. In fact, during my first episode, I basically have invited a
Did you have a hacker on your
yeah.
show?
The title of the podcast episode is Ethical Hacker, and I have invited Kevin Mitnick, which is the most prominent black
Yeah,
hat
Mitnick. Yeah.
hacker from the U.S. and which turned to be a white hacker now as a security consultant. And he basically revealed a lot of things on that, and learned so many things about it. But you can imagine, this is basically a thing that was not, executed immediately. This was been planned for obvious reasons, right? So, but then again, I think, we should learn, hopefully learn on this particular event, and and in fact, there's so many things we can learn, to be quite candid about this. Okay, moving to the next slide. Okay, this is interesting because this is the one we're talking about a while ago. What are the demographics of perpetrators, di ba? So this is the thing. Fraud hits companies from all angles. So we have external, internal, di ba? But the thing is, if you look at it, there's only 2% difference between the external perpetrator and internal perpetrator. By definition, external perpetrator includes customer, right? Themselves, the hackers, as we all know it, and even the vendors and suppliers, those folks that you are working with
So
within your
so is
organization.
this percentage the number of cases? So 39% of fraud is done by an external perpetrator. Is
Yes,
that what we're
yes,
saying? Okay, okay,
correct.
got it.
This is more of a global context. And you can see the difference between the external one and the internal one is just 2%. Right? For the internal one, I almost fell on my chair when I saw this because you have the middle management, the operation folks, and the senior management, which is basically one of the stakeholders of your organization is part of it. And this has been validated because there are real cases relative to this, right? So, which is quite interesting. Now, and the most powerful one is the collusion between the two, which is again a two-digit number at 20%. It's a bit high to be to be honest.
Yeah, I think particularly for banking, no, because
Yeah.
I was also working in a fraud unit before. Yeah, in my one of my last jobs was ahead of a fraud and surveillance team,
Hmm.
and there I think the idea of an external perpetrator, in a way, parang compromising a bank. It certainly can happen, but it's much easier for an internal perpetrator to do it,
Mm.
and that's actually unsettling because so many of course you try to hire people with very high integrity and ethics. I
Mhm.
mean, since
Yeah.
we're an ethics podcast, that's part of the hiring criteria, no, when you get
Yeah.
people in banks, no. But in
Mm.
many cases nga, and 37 is about right, the perpetrator involves someone inside, no.
Mhm.
And it
Yeah.
can be very minor things, no, parang like I remember one form of fraud that we were always looking out for was dormant accounts.
Yes.
Dormant accounts, clients haven't touched them, and uh people are always on the lookout of sudden movement in a dormant account, because
Mm.
that might mean that someone has already compromised it and is siphoning off the money. And you'll never know. Maybe the dormant client may just pop up out of nowhere, or maybe some of them have already died.
Mm.
So usually you're on the lookout for those dormant accounts who have not made a movement in maybe a decade, or several years have passed, and then
Mhm.
suddenly the money moved. And
Right.
that's an interesting sign. No, and other things. This is one is very specific, but it did not occur in a bank that I worked for. It occurred in another bank. Just to chip in the case studies. This is also ano naman, more of an accounting issue. Suspense accounts.
Mm.
These are transitory accounts. No, you just keep a balance in it. Maybe it's
Yeah.
in preparation for some payment, and it's usually balanced off by a contra asset, contra
Contra asset.
liability
Yeah.
account.
Mm.
Anyway, one suspense account, and I don't know if this is a tip for fraud teams, no, who are always looking for a gain, is in HR. Usually there's a suspense account in human resources, where you kind of credit the accrued benefits like retirement pay,
Mhm.
so on and so forth, of staff. But unless you have a very very robust process, it does not necessarily balance out with the resignations and the terminations, no.
Mhm.
Kunyari, if your bank has like a 5-year or a 10-year retirement vesting policy,
Mhm.
so you're already accruing that cost in preparation for
Correct.
Edgar's retirement. But what if
Mhm.
Edgar suddenly resigned or got terminated before he earned the right to get that retirement pay?
Mhm.
So he's gone.
Yeah.
But the amount that was accrued still there, no?
Mhm.
And that should be synchronized with your kind of your personnel database, right? So
Yeah.
you're able to release the money that was previously accrued. So in this case that I am aware of, they never did. You know, Literally decades and decades of resigned or terminated employees' accrued retirement
Mm.
benefits
Mhm.
were still in that suspense account, and it was discovered because suddenly there were debits from that suspense account. Kasi that's like floating cash, no? Somewhere in the
Exactly.
middle of nowhere. And
Exactly.
people won't check it kasi it's not part of your reported FS.
Mm.
It's a contra account. Eh. So when you suddenly start siphoning money out of it, you can always siphon money on the other, siphon the balance on the
Yeah.
contra account. No one would detect it, doing the balancing in the assets and liabilities, or
Mm.
even in the expenses. So it's suddenly free money that was coming in, no? And then here's another one. Sorry, I'm parang
Yeah, that's
deja
good.
vu.
That's good.
Another case naman. This one naman happens in the credit card, in the credit card industry.
Mhm.
Um, you know how people get annoyed when they get annual fees, no, for their credit cards.
Yes,
And
yes.
actually, the customer service, up to a certain limit, have the ability to reverse that, uh, you know, that
Mhm.
annual fee charge. No?
Right.
Anyway, in this another bank that was also a case study, the way it worked was, the employees, also the customer service, also were required to specify a suspense account where all those reversals would be charged to, and then that would be zeroed out by finance later as a whole, no?
Right.
But you can specify pala any account. It doesn't have to
You
be the
can.
suspense account.
You can. You can.
So there was this super agent who got the idea of, why don't I reverse it into my account? So he tried it, So
It works.
it's technically a credit, no?
It works.
Kasi it's reversal of a charge.
Yeah.
And he was getting free money, he was just
Yep.
reversing,
Yeah.
customers right and left, and it was being credited to him. um and how did he get caught? No, I don't know if you comment about this. He started buying, really expensive watches,
Mm.
Rolex, Omega. I mean, more than a person of his particular age and tenure and rank. Parang lifestyle check doon siya na medyo nakita. Expensive watches, mamaya mo brand new car, mamaya
Yeah.
mo started treating his office mates out palagi. He's a very generous guy.
Right.
So people were starting to suspect na, okay, something's funny going on here.
Mm.
And then when they looked at the transaction log, yun nga, dami. I don't remember anymore the amount, but what I think it was in the high seven digits, no, ang na-reverse
Mm.
niya, peso wise. Really, ang daming fraud, ang daming potential fraud. But
There's a
anyways,
lot.
yeah, I'm preempting your stories now. Why don't you share more
No,
stories?
that's okay. That's okay. I think I don't know if you remember before, ING Barings, like the fall of ING Barings. There's one guy who's the trader himself. Who's the background of this guy? He knows the front office and the back office, right? So he knows everything, and he, like what you said, he's managed to create an account, transfer it to his own personal account, and he does the trading. You do buy, sell, done deal, and whatever income or margins that he has, he transfer it there, and it's been running for more than a number of years
For
undetected.
years, for
Yes,
years, yeah. In fact,
because
it contributed to the profitability of their unit. No, they were the
yeah,
most profitable unit in the entire Barings. Hindi pa ING Barings, ng Barings pa
yeah,
lang.
Barings pa lang, oh,
Kasi
Barings
ING ended up buying them, no,
buying them,
because
oh,
because they
but
were insolvent.
it's a very good story. We can learn a lot from that because there was an audit conducted at that time, and because he's an internal guy, they just ignore it. Ah, this guy has been here for quite some time and so on. So that's the trust factor, right? And which again, going back to this particular slide, basically reflects what we're talking about, diba? Okay, moving to the next slide. Another case study. Oh, this is interesting because this is a Swiss bank, a very popular Swiss bank, UBS. And if you look at it, the description is very simple, no? A simple dongle. Because I don't know, here in the Philippine context, we don't use much of a dongle. There was a time we were using that. But in Switzerland, they're still using it because there are two types of authentication. The
Are these
hardware
are these the
authentication.
ones with the kind of the numbers that refresh
Yes,
every
yes,
second? No, and you can use
exactly.
that.
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
So there are two types: the hardware authentication and the software. Diba? So, but this one are the one being used in Switzerland because Switzerland is very strict in terms of mga data privacy and stuff. So they're using this dangle. Now the thing is, on this particular case, it involved a corporate client of a bank, no, and 10 employees basically issue payments. They have an authority to issue payments in the name of that corporation. But only 3 normally did so, as being mentioned. Diba? One of the remaining 7 staff had his dangle stolen. But since he was not part of that group, he issued payments, but he did not immediately notice the theft. So he didn't inform the bank on that. So the thief waited for 8 months. Very, very diligent.
Very patient.
Patient. So he waited for 8 months and then tried the transaction. But again, because it's fully authenticated, it raised a red flag and it was blocked. But again, this is a classic example. Because if you look at it on a general context, it's just a dangle, Doc, right? I mean, how will you be able to penetrate that, right? But this is a classic example of, a simple thing that has gone wrong. Okay, so moving to another stats. This is an interesting one because this basically describes the regions between Asia, global, and then a small snippet of data. Again, these are all data stuff. This is your turf. And they basically collected this. They realized they cannot compare Philippines to the external, because we have a very small amount of information. So what they did instead, let's just use the fraud incident on the annual basis, and they basically put Philippines on the lower part of this slide. No? But anyway, going back to the external perpetrators and internal ones. So you can see here, in Southeast Asia, the number 1 external perpetrators are the vendors. These are your business partners, so to speak, right? It's 29%. Compared to the global one, which is your customer. Okay, then followed by, on the global, the hackers naman, 24%. So you can see it's a very interesting lineup if you compare with Southeast Asia and global for the external one. Now, if you go to the internal perpetrators, global is much more significant. Senior management is 26%. So you can imagine there's some problems on their ethics.
Yeah, the just like I said earlier, it's much easier for an internal perpetrator and much easier for a senior executive to do it because they have signing authority. No one will ever suspect them. So it's really not uncommon for a senior manager to be guilty of mga fraud, mga embezzlement. In fact, I remember another case naman, another bank.
Yeah.
And I don't know, let me know what you think of this. No? Parang ang nangyayari was, so banks offer these investment parang paper, no? Like treasury bills, time deposit. And what this person was doing, branch manager, very highly respected branch manager, he or she was issuing, so when a client would come to place some money in a time deposit, normally it comes with a certificate, no? And what the officer would do, kasi you can book it manually, in that bank's system. So you book the placement for how long, the tenor, the rate, and normally the rate is prescribed by your treasurer or treasury team, no? Now, okay, if you're gonna get time deposits today, this is how much you should pay for it. So what the branch manager was doing was, okay, so you give me your 1 million, I'll book it. Let's say at that time, the prevailing interest rate is like 4% per annum, which is pretty high. But then I will issue you another certificate that says 3%. So the certificate, which is just a piece of paper, didn't really come from the bank. It came from that manager with the bank's logo. Medyo yun din yung pinaka-fraud, no? So and then upon maturity, syempre, the client will come to claim the money, or this is long before the advent of digital banking, obviously. The branch manager would then get the proceeds of the maturing placement and then deduct the difference. Kasi you placed it at 4, but you're paying the client 3, so you get the extra 1.
Correct.
And then put it elsewhere. So in theory, whatever you did promise the client, you actually did give the client. Client was expecting 3, client got 3, but you actually got 4. So it's a rather multi-layered fraud if you think about it. Parang at worst, you're guilty of misrepresenting the bank.
Yeah.
perhaps, no?
Mhm.
And then one day, so how was this found? Apparently, this scam, technically, it was a scam, was going on for years, no, almost a decade. No,
Mhm.
it was discovered when parang the bank upgraded its system na whenever you have a pending maturity or an imminent maturity, the system now auto
Mhm.
sends an advice to the customer via email. So, yan,
Mhm.
dyan nagsimula. So, the customer got an advice, suddenly went to the branch, and then at that time, as it turns out, the branch manager was on leave. So,
Mm.
hindi niya naabangan.
Yeah.
And then the customer comes and says, "Hi, may I help you?" Sabi ng assistant branch manager.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, I got an advice in the email, and it says that my deposit has matured.
Mhm.
So I'm here to, complain.
Mhm.
Why? Well, I think well, not really complain. I'm here to report a probable bug. So sabi ng customer. So
Mhm.
medyo perplex yung assistant branch manager. Sabi nung, how do you mean? Well, it says here on the email advice that my time deposit at 4% has already matured.
Mhm.
But I think it might have been a typo because my certificate says 3%. Ayan na. So that's how it started, no? And then, of course, the branch
All right.
manager checks that, that doesn't look interesting. That doesn't look, normal. And then, nung
Mhm.
nakita na yung totoong certificate, as it turns out, hindi pala talaga authentic yon, no? So, they syempre
Mm.
apologize na, actually, ma'am, it's really 4%. Here's your money. And then it triggers the
Mm.
investigation, no? Tama-tama, pabalik yung original branch manager from leave the next week.
Mm.
Wow, what they found out was this scam had been going on for years, no, almost a decade.
Mm.
And this branch manager had, I think, to the tune of 8 digits na, no, in terms
Mm.
of net, no,
Right.
na neto niya. Kasi high net worth clients eh. These
Correct.
are like, atypical mga rich Chinese and
Mm.
whoever
Right.
were making these placements, no? Sinispreadan lang niya, like extra 1%, parang ganun. So, technically no one really lost money kasi the client got what they were promised. The bank naman got the amount, was able to deploy it.
Mm.
And then may tinabi lang on the side yung branch manager. But I think the issue talaga there is misrepresentation and the fact that you're not being transparent, and it's not legit. I don't know eh. That's what makes fraud a rather interesting animal eh. There are no boundaries to it eh. But maybe there are general principles no, that we can discuss mamaya.
Yeah, it's something to do with culture also of that particular organization. Because I remember before I have an argument with a certain bank security expert, so to speak, no, and he used the analogy of buying a very expensive Yale, just this Yale lock, which is about 5,000 plus or more. And they said, for as long as I buy this very expensive security tool, I'll be confident with the security of the bank. And I told him, that will not guarantee you a full security, because even if you have 20,000 pesos, Yale lock, you lock your front door and your back door is open and your window is open and your maid is talking to someone else or the text, that basically creates a risk for you. So, I mean, we can always have that argument. But again, that context of, complacency about people within the organization is something else. So I think that's a very good thing. The other thing I would like to share, these kinds of things about the system of the bank. I remember before I was doing a treasury implementation on one of the local banks. I won't mention the name. That, I'm not an accounting expert, but I fully understand how accounting methodology works. And this is a classic example of transaction. The bank basically received a grant, a Japanese yen grant. Okay. What happens is he received it, like, for example, today, and he booked it to its ledger today, right? Now, the thing is, 20 days, 30 days after, he recalls that Japanese yen again. By the way, he booked this as a Philippine peso, right? So you can imagine there are two books for the banks. One is a peso and the other one is a foreign currency denominated, which is an FCDU. So what happens is the first transaction, the first deal, you booked it to peso. So you converted it from Japanese yen to peso, right? Booked for this particular day. Then 20 days or 30 days after, he recalled that transaction and booked it again as Japanese yen. And I saw that because we were implementing it from their system going to our system. I saw that, vividly. I said, "What is this, ma'am?" No, that is a Japanese yen grant that they need to book, blah, blah, blah. And I said, "Yes, I can see that. But why did you open it again 30 days or 20 days later and book it again as a Japanese yen? Remember, you book it originally as peso, right?" So from there on, I have to write a letter to the Mancom saying that I will not continue with my implementation because of this. Because,
Because of that
for
issue.
me, yeah, literally, it's just I put my Japanese yen from my left pocket to the right pocket, right? And 30 days after, of course, in consideration that I didn't wash my pants, so it's theoretically on the right side, right? The right pocket of my pants, right? It will no longer be on the left. So I was explaining to the accountant, the chief accountant, how did it happen? It's magic. And later on, I think after a full blown investigation, so she was requested to get the early retirement. And I was surprised that again, in all fairness, this is basically a thing that they're actually doing for dress rehearsals, right? For their shareholders meeting, to basically see, the normal graphs of the bank is up and down, right? It's like a lifeline. You can see an up and down graph. You don't see a full vertical line there. If it's a full horizontal line, then that bank is dead, right? So, but it has to be an up and down. It's a red and green. But they would like to see the graph all in a green light, so that the investor will say, "Oh, we're doing good. We're doing very well, Doc. It's all green," right? So that's why a while ago, if you notice, I choose red because red basically attracts attention. So that's why it's there. But it's a very interesting story, and it may take us 5 hours to tell those
To
kind of.
unpack that, no?
Yes, a very interesting one. Okay, next case study, sir. So this is another interesting one because this involves four Swiss bank. Yeah. Uh, this is more of unusual activity, yeah, as signals of fraud. So a recent case in Switzerland, as being mentioned, is a perfect illustration of how behavioral analytics, again, data analytics plays an important part of this, doc. Looking for a suspicious activity that could stop a fraud. In March, Swiss company bank accounts were hacked on basically estimated at 1.2 million Swiss francs. And it was fraudulently transferred to an account in somewhere in Kyrgyzstan. No? Although four Swiss banks were involved, only one blocked the transfer after spotting a spelling mistake. So my question is, Doc, who among these four banks you think are the one who managed to block it? Make a wild guess.
Wow. Well, I'm not familiar with two of them, like Credit Suisse and Raiffeisen. I've actually dealt with them before. I'm not familiar with the other two, no. But so one of these banks are wrong spelling.
No, actually, only one of the banks prevented it to happen.
Prevented. Oh my gosh, I don't know. Who, maybe it's
All
one
the
of
other
the
four,
all the other three. You mean didn't spot it?
all
No,
the other three did it. Yes.
all the four Swiss
And the,
banks
chair,
were
the
involved.
chairman of the company and the chairman of the country targeted by this attack believes the others should have noted something as all the same, right? So
Oh my gosh, I
that,
don't know.
it's just a
I'm just gonna
just a
guess.
wild guess. There's no
Siguro
price tag on it.
Raiffeisen Bank was the one who spotted it. No.
Yes, that's correct. That's why it's
Aba,
colored
bilib
yellow.
ako ah. Okay.
Credit Suisse is the most popular among these four, right? But
Yeah.
because they have
Doesn't
a
mean doesn't mean you're
international
good.
presence. Yeah, yeah. And Zurcher and Luzener Bank are cantonal banks. In our case, we have rural banks.
Correct.
It's something like that. But Raiffeisen Bank is a European regional bank. So you can see Raiffeisen Bank in Germany, in Belgium, and some other places. So But the answer is very obvious, right? It's yellow.
Yeah, yeah.
That's why if you ask your students, oh, make a wild guess, which among these four managed to
So
prevent?
a blue logo is not necessarily good. So there's a lot of banks with
No, I think
blue logos.
one indicator is that these folks are good in spelling.
Right, right, right.
So they managed to see, that's not the right spelling of Doc's name, right? So it has to be Dominic. So something like that. But this is an interesting case, right?
Amazing, amazing.
Okay, so for the stats, for the past 24 months, again, this is a general context of things. Uh, you can see Philippines. Oh, now Philippines is here already. Southeast Asia and global. So we just compare these three, I would say, categories. So for Philippines, you can see asset misappropriation is number one at 52%. Again, this is 24 months, so we need to take into account that the pandemic year 2020 is already included here, right? And bribery and corruption, number two, and the others. In Southeast Asia, we're relatively the same. Number one being asset misappropriation and bribery and corruption. But if you look at the global context, you can see customer fraud is number one, then followed by cybercrime. And asset misappropriation and bribery and corruption is pretty much on the third and fourth level. I think this spells out that the disparity between the economic conditions of these countries, right? But even
Yeah,
if
you're right.
those first world countries, there's still a lot of bribery and corruption in a way, but probably it's not as wide as what we can see in some parts of Southeast Asia.
Yeah, yeah.
For me, I was pretty much interested. This stats actually surprises me in a way, but I think for the past 24 months, it's an interesting one. But cybercrime, it's pretty much on the 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth level, 19%.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah. Okay. Ah, another case study.
Hi, this is
You're
new.
familiar with it?
Wirecard. Oh.
Yes, this is
Didn't this
new.
also
Yes.
affect this also affect the Philippines? Sort of.
Yes, yes. Actually, they have I think the COO went to the Philippines in Cebu. Actually, that was the story behind it. But this is an interesting story because Wirecard is a digital payment thing, but they also have an investment portfolio, no? So if you look at the graphs, no, I think it was categorized from 2018 up to 2020. This is interesting because from the early part of 2018, it's all rosy, right, and promising, di ba? So during this time, this Wirecard somewhat created a hype in Europe, di ba? So particularly on the significant earnings of the Commerce Bank Index. But even when it went through the year of 2019, then you can see a lot of controversial stuff happening. The Singapore office was raided, and FT, which is the Financial Times, reported a suspected transactions in Singapore. But at the same time, to basically hide those negative stories, Marcus Brown, which is the CEO, basically announced the SoftBank deal, which is about $1 billion US dollars. Just to steer the market, distract attention as much as possible, right? So if there's one of the things I've learned with this folk is that if anything negative news happening in your organization, distract it with some positive stuff, like you bought someone or you
PR.
are getting something, and that's what they did. They announced the deal of the SoftBank, but I think it didn't push through. And then from there, the negative thing didn't really move away, and just to basically establish confidence on their shareholders, they hired KPMG, to do an independent audit. And the story behind it went off because KPMG doesn't want to sign the financial statement because they said they couldn't verify where this third-party profit is coming
Ayawan
from.
na, laglagan na.
Oh, yeah. I don't want to sign it. I mean, they created the report that they don't want to sign it because there's a lot of uncertainty there. And then yeah, 2020, you can see a lot of news coming down, and Marcus Braun himself declared that almost 1.9 billion euros of cash is missing. And this is a classic example of accounting and financial statement fraud, right? So if you go back to the previous slide we went through, this is a good classic example. But this is the story behind this is really interesting. They even filed a lawsuit or a legal case with Financial Times because these are stock market superstar. All of a sudden, di ba? They will be dragged along with all of this missing missing cash, di ba? 1.9 billion. I'm not sure, but I think during the story, the CEO yata went to Cebu and something happened. If I recall it correctly, I'm not sure if he went missing or something happened to him. No? So, but there's a lot of institutions who also would like to buy Wirecard, of course, for a very low price. Because Wirecard as a name is already there, no, in the market. But then again, this particular incident tarnishes the reputation, diba? So sayang. Well, this one is something interesting because this is just basically how I'm not gonna go through it in detail because you are more expert on this rather than me, but there are two types of detection methods that's being used more or less in the in financials or banking, and there's what we call the fraud detection methods, the traditional one, and the novel fraud. And there's a lot of advantages and disadvantages. I think you've raised a very good point about looking at certain things, like if you're basically diving in a big ocean and you're looking for something, so you need to set certain criteria because it's so huge and it will take some time and effort, and you may never be able to find what you're looking for, right? So that's why this kind of detection method is very helpful, but also there are some disadvantages. And actually I just presented this because I would like to have your thoughts more than mine because I'm not an expert on this.
Yeah,
Any
well,
thoughts on this particular methods, or probably there are much more newer
yeah.
methods that's being used to have, right?
One thing that I remember back in the day, no, because I before I did fraud, I also did credit risk,
Yeah,
and credit risk is about defaults, but there is a part about credit risk that's also due to fraud. For example, you lend to a fake customer,
right.
you're never going to collect from that customer again. And I remember back in the day when we were doing credit modeling, scorecard development,
Mhm,
we were required to remove the fraud population from the sample.
mhm.
So, and the reason for that is when you're creating a credit risk score, you want to remove fraud because fraud is not necessarily because of credit risk, no?
Correct.
Usually credit risk is because they can't afford it. So yung capacity to pay is not there, or maybe yung in a way the sector that you're lending to is really a high risk sector as far as incomes and employment is concerned. So you want to capture those behaviors, those characteristics, whereas fraud isn't necessarily performed by low income people. Some of them
Mhm,
are quite sophisticated. So having fraud in the data would mess it up. So we are first removing the frauds, and then you do your credit risk modeling. So then you go to the fraud modeling naman. Fraud modeling, one immediate challenge you have coming back from the day, no, is the fact that there are far fewer fraud cases than you would like for you to learn from. No? So let's say in a sea of 1 million. Kaya nga I was very curious about yung mga stats that you showed earlier. It seems
yeah.
to suggest that there are far more fraud now happening than ever before. And
Yes.
ironically, that's actually is good for analytics because the more cases you have, the more data you can, kind of do data mining on. Kasi back in the day, you'd be lucky to get a 1% fraud rate. So out of
Mhm,
1 million transactions,
yeah.
you would be lucky to get 1,000 fraud cases, no? And even then, that 1,000 as a sparse sample may not be easily generalizable. No? It's parang there are, in some cases, there are parang repeating patterns,
Mhm,
motifs. Pero it's not like credit risk that you can say, okay, at this income threshold, I'll stop lending, or at this combination of income and gender and whatever, I can discriminate against you from from a loan perspective. So
Right.
fraud, it often looks quite random, no, from a demographic perspective. So there's no typical demographic uh,
Correct.
apart from yung external internal thing that you showed. So that's already a problem when you're doing models. Because let's say you have a fraud rate of, let's say, kahit sabihin mo 5%. No? So out of total transactions, 5% are fraud. When you think about it in terms of classifying, you're creating a model. The model can, and remember, when you're creating a model, you're supposed to push parang the model to the highest accuracy level possible. No?
Mhm.
So what sometimes actually happens is the model will say, okay, I'll just assume everyone is positive. Everyone is a good customer, na non-fraud. And
Right.
I will be 95% correct. Kasi 5% lang yung fraud mo. So that's the problem. This precision recall problem in classification is
Mhm.
quite tough, no, in fraud. And of
Mhm.
course, there are ways of getting around it a little bit, like you artificially inflate the number of fraud records for the purposes of modeling. So
Right.
you might have an original sample of 1,000. Why don't I inflate them to 10,000? Para 10% na yung ano
Correct.
natin, fraud rate natin, as opposed to as opposed to 1%. So that the model can better grab the features, no, and understand the features. But even if you do that, it's still a mixed bag, no. Another thing then is, so you might not catch the fraudster based on on demographics, but you might catch them based on behavior. So they may be striking at very regular times of the day, regular times of the week, or they may be coming from typical locations. Remember, ngayon there are VPNs already, so it's hard to catch mga hackers, no, or trying to infiltrate your system kasi they could be coming anywhere from the world. So wala
Yeah.
na naman yun, no? You can't trust the location data.
Right.
Kaya ang interesting, pag internal fraud, you often have a few more data points to look at, like what time was this person in the office, or what time did they log in the system, how long do they normally stay on the system, and bakit at this particular day masyado mahaba yata yung session mo, no?
Mhm.
Parang out of like an 8-hour day, you might be online for 6 hours because you spend 1 hour in lunch break and another hour walking around socializing. So 6 is the kind of the normal behavior mo, let's say yung waterline mo.
Mhm.
And then on a couple of days, suddenly you're at 18 hours straight. What happened there? Overtime ka ba? Yung mga ganyan, no? So, but still, that's if you have parang all these network records and logs, no? And you're very strict about sharing your ID or not sharing your ID so that others can basically camouflage their behavior. Kaya ngayon, like especially in a BPO, typically stricto yan, no, sa mga
Mhm.
access. Um, you have here a box that says social network analysis. That's
Correct.
quite popular in fraud analysis because it's a totally different way of looking at the data na. You're no longer looking at parang a classification problem, like fraud or not fraud. You're looking at this person has a relationship with this other person and with that other person. And the typical number of relationships, let's say in a data set, let's say payments, no? If you have a payment data set, you can create a network of payments. And each node is an account. Account A transfers to account B. And then you create a massive network of that. And then you will find occasionally may mga weird spots like, hey, look, there are 3 accounts that are just passing money between the three of them. Parang triangle ang itsura niya sa network. Or four, no? Why would they do that, no? Parang normally ang transfer is one way, no, or two way. Pero ito parang nagpapasahan ng parang pa-triangle. And of course it's not always the case, but that's often a pretext for looking at people who are doing money laundering, no? They're trying to parang create a false trail of transaction. And na hindi like if you look at them by pairs, they look completely legitimate. A to B, B to C, C to A, no? Pero if you create a network, nagiging triangle siya. Why are you passing money to each other? Pero yung net result is the same. Baka naglo-launder na to ng pera. May mga ganun. Again, it's not automatic na ganun. So, all I'm saying is social network analysis has been quite helpful. And there's also a kind of a saying na fraud is often a social phenomenon, meaning yung notion of a lone hacker slaving away in some dark room wearing a hood. That's more romantic than anything. Usually fraud is perpetrated as a conspiracy. There are several people involved. And you can then trace them using these network analyses. No? Like, can you create a network of emails? Can you create a network of payments? Can you create a network of relationships? Like, there's this rather famous data set called the Panama Papers. You know, you can
Mhm.
find it. You can find it online. No, so tong Panama Papers um, is actually a data set of leaked documents. No,
Right.
and if you employ network analysis to analyze the Panama Papers, you can now start to to draw links of networks between people na ito palang politician na to related pala sa company na to, na employer pala nitong ganito, nung employee na to, na nag-transfer ng pera dyan. You're suddenly drawing these parang linkages, and then suddenly you'll find linkages that seem to cluster around a particular person na, hey, look, this looks suspicious. I mean, they'll just pop up and then you can run various metrics no to determine how influential a particular node is in a network. It's a similar process to what Google uses to rank mga search results. No, they use an algorithm called page rank. Page rank is actually a network algorithm. You're looking at in a corpus of web pages, you can draw a network link or an edge between, kunyari may hyperlink ka no, between website A and B.
Mhm.
So A is basically linking to B. And what their page rank system does is it calculates pages with the most incoming links. Kaya
Right.
mapapansin mo whenever you search anything on the net, one of the top pages that always pops up is Wikipedia. Kasi nowadays, Wikipedia is the encyclopedia. Everyone uses it as parang the reference. Then
Yeah.
they link to Wikipedia. So yung authority ng Wikipedia on many topics quite high.
Mm.
So ganyan din yung social network. If you find that many payments are ultimately terminating into this one node, why? No, try to look into that. No, or the other way around. This node is powering a lot of payments from other people. So we were talking about social network analysis. I was saying na it's really useful kasi it not as a replacement but as really a complement. Kaya nga itong yung chart mo rito, it really makes sense na you're using a lot of these parang data-driven methods.
Mhm.
Pero yun lang, parang compared to other classification domains, for example, like credit risk or even marketing, fraud is really a hard animal to manage because yun nga, it's hard to generalize patterns. Tsaka your opponent intentionally obfuscates their tracks, no? Kumbaga, they know na if they do a repeating motif, huli agad sila because of these automated methods. So usually they prey on companies that are kind of weak, no, or
Mhm.
quite primitive with their, or look like they're primitive with their fraud detection.
Yeah.
One
Fully
of
agree.
the one of the earliest companies I know that got advanced with fraud detection is eBay, no, tsaka PayPal,
Yeah.
because clearly they were pioneers no, in the parang digital marketing e-commerce space, no. They have one of the most advanced fraud detection.
Mhm.
And of course yung Facebook, social media, Twitter, although they're not necessarily spotting fraud, parang they're also fake accounts. They're using the same methods to identify yan, mga fake news,
Mhm.
mga disinformation. So yeah, no, kasi sanay na sila, they've got a lot of data.
Mhm.
But a typical bank, telco, they do have a lot of data, pero it's more like traditional data. No? It's not the unstructured data. And that's what we can enrich all of this.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think what you're referring to is probably this slide also. No? You were telling me a while ago about this
Yeah,
pattern.
exactly that. No, you have this
Oh,
weird phenomena, no, na suddenly people are passing money to each other.
yeah. So this is the actual stuff. So you have the normal behavior, you have the fraudulent pattern, and then you have this maze of things, which is
Yeah, that's
interesting.
exactly it. If you do the Panama Papers data set, ganyan yung mabubuo mo. You can
Yeah,
start to draw connections between various people and their activities. Really fascinating.
that's true. Anyway, I think let's move to the next slide. You know, I've shown some typical studies or the case studies that we have. Sorry, but the thing is, if you go back dun sa the slide 15, for instance, if what are the things that's happening, particularly in the context of the financial institution? And one of the things we've learned is that for banks or financial institutions, uh, most, if not all, does not have really a dedicated fraud teams, right? I mean, these are the things for so many reasons. Diba? They're trying to maintain a certain number of resources. They don't have funding for it, and so on and so forth. But it's the fraud teams kasi can literally be a combination of in a local context, it could be a compliance officer, CISA, certified folks. But for small organization, it's pretty much the IT guy himself as the as the fraud investigator, din, di ba? But I think it's also worthwhile looking at the entire organization, no, in terms of how are they gonna evaluate and assess this type of risk. Also, banks, we've noticed that there's no real-time controls. Again, there's a lot of reasons for that. One is a typical thing is basically uh, the scenario of having this what we call the system-related real-time stuff. No? So which, again, not all systems are capable of. No? Transaction side. This is a good thing you mentioned a while ago because I can show you a lot of information, but it can be interpreted in so many ways. One of the things I learned, if I have a friend who is taking law, and during the bar exam, I realized that most of their question things are run in essay. Yeah. And having the interpreting the traffic signals, the red, green, and yellow. I realized if you ask one lawyer or probably five lawyers on what's the meaning of this particular thing, it can be interpreted in so many ways. And pretty much the same thing on the transaction size. And in so many ways, there are a lot of things that's being interpreted, and probably it's not the right interpretation, so to speak. But mostly, has been highlighted, more than 60% or less. These fraudsters are looking at the weak controls, internal controls, as a contributing factor for these kinds of fraudulent transactions. And mostly, as we've seen it, are internal folks contributing to this particular effect. But I think the most important thing I would like to highlight is, of course, we're all from technology, but at the same time, it's very important to have all of these elements, no? And one big part of it is the big data, wherein these are the things that you are promoting for, no? Because like what you said, without a good quality data, it will be challenging to implement these kinds of analytics and so on. And therefore, having a good quality data on this big data will give you at least an advantage of reducing yung mga false positives, di ba? So that's one way of doing things. But the others are essentially part and parcel of what we do now. We have risk modeling, dynamic profiling, and machine learning is a very, I would say, critical thing for most of this fraudulent transactions nowadays. I mean, machines can learn so many things based on historical transactions, for instance, behaviors, and so on. So that's why I put emphasis on the big data stuff, because all the things I presented a while ago is primarily a result and a consequence of the data stuff that you guys are pushing through. And then, of course, needless to say, but in a nutshell, this gives us, there are so many reasons why they said technology wins. Now, but again, I'm a little bit biased, I must admit. But, the way I look at the cybersecurity or the fraud, the digital banking fraud or the financial fraud or crimes in in um, in a certain context now, because like what I said, it's not those approach is not a one size fits all. Okay, that's pretty obvious. The other thing is, we really need to assess what hits us in a way. No, so that's why we need to have a fundamental understanding of what's going on. It's always, again, I'll be using the word vigilance, no? And vigilance is not only something being used in crime prevention thing, but it's also something that we can use on the financial world. And vigilance is a key. And from a banking perspective, we all came from the banking sector once upon a time. And the word due diligence is commonly used, diba? So that's why it's important to have those kinds of factors for us to be able to effectively assess where we are. So in a nutshell, I think uh, one of the things that we can perhaps learn from this is looking at it in a holistic way, rather than, like what I said, using as an example, as an analogy of buying a very expensive lock, so which will not really guarantee a full security, right? So we really need to understand the structure, the content, and the context of what we are protecting, or what we're looking for, and from there, it's not bad to ask advice from experts, and also try to get best practices. What are the industries are doing? What are they doing effectively well? What are the things that we can still improve further? I think it's very important. That's why we have a lot of groups, forums, consortiums, and pretty much, these kinds of thing will be very helpful and valuable to us moving forward. Yeah. Well, anyway, I think I'm basically at the end of my presentation, Doc. Now, so the only thing I can conclude in a nutshell, as I've said, this is it's not a one size fits all thing, right? So we really need to assess the situations as it comes. Uh, Again, we also need to understand that each risk are different from each other. No, so we really need to find. I always use this word, fit for purpose solution, right? For our circumstance. No, and again, it won't harm us if we do, like what I said, the due diligence and
No.
having
Yeah.
vigilance. And in fact, as you've noticed, those stats that I have shared, um, the difference between the internal fraudsters and external is not really much, just 2%.
Yeah.
And the collaboration, or at least the collusion rather, of these two are not far behind. So again, the thing is looking at it always on a holistic side of things will be very helpful. And as I mentioned a while ago, let's look at things, what things that's working effectively well, and things that we can improve further. Because you may never know. There are things that we're doing well. Maybe we're just ignoring it, right? I mean, because it's not really something that a good working platform or module that you will be throwing away because there's a new one coming along, right? So I think we really need to take a look at it, which one works effectively well, and things that we can still to improve further, right? So I think I always look at that, because every time I go to banks or financial institution, oh, how come you're not upgrading your security firewall, etc., and so on and so forth? They said, oh, we don't have budget for it, right? But when they were penalized by BSP or central banks, they have money for that. So you can imagine. I mean, their priorities are not so clear. The banks are pretty particular on reputational damages, right? You can imagine you can pay a penalty, 25 million pesos and so on. But the reputation that is happening, or at least things that impacting your institution, will be something that you cannot revert back. If people started to move away from your bank because of a reputational damages, then it's quite difficult to go back. So there. I think I hope we managed to contribute something, Doc, in my own
Yeah,
little way.
yeah. Just we're coming right actually past the hour na nga eh. And I think uh there's so much more we can really probe, no, when
Mhm.
it comes to fraud analysis.
Yeah.
fraud cases. I think maybe the whole point of it is the tools may have changed, no? And like dati, it used to be physical banks and people used to fake checks.
Yeah.
Parang sa movie na Catch Me If You Can, no? Pero ngayon, it's all digital, but so the tools have changed, but people are still doing cybercrime naman ngayon, no? So I think the insight there is for as long as there are structures, people will always work to undermine the structure, you know. So and there are always two ways to make money, you know. There's the legal way, the legit
Mm,
way, and the illegal way. And part of having I guess the ethical side of it is how do you disable the incentives for fraud, no? That's an
mm,
important thing. Like I remember the one of the traditional things we were taught, no, is this concept of a fraud triangle, no? Parang fraud is at the intersection of opportunity, pressure, and rationalization, no? And
mm,
they all talk to different things. Like opportunity is a kind of a structural thing, no? If there was no money lying on the floor, nobody would attempt to pick it up. Parang ganun ang dating. So if you design systems that are inherently vulnerable, you're just begging for, you know, disaster. Somebody will try. So that's opportunity. Pressure naman is more about, I guess, generally the lifestyle of people. If and it's not because people actually need money. Some fraud is actually that. Some is because of social pressures.
mm,
You know, some of these hackers, for example, are part of a community and they want to kind of rise up in their community and be a, you know, be known as a black hat hacker. So there's both social and financial pressure, you know, to commit that fraud, and that's more about society, you know. Parang what kind of pressures do we put on people to actually then force them to explore means that are no longer within kind of kosher grounds, no? And then do fraud. And finally, the rationalization. That's more of a character issue. Parang if one thing that leads to rationalization is if they see other people do it and they're not getting caught, it
mm.
actually encourages others to continue to do it because they might not get caught too. So parang nagtitwist ngayon na, it's just gonna be once anyway. It's for a good reason, etc., etc. And then later on, it's a slippery slope. Now you're sliding down a slippery slope, and you're gonna get all of this. No? Yeah, okay. So, you know, that was really a great conversation, Edgar. I'm really impressed with all of the cases, and I'm sure people are quite impressed as well. Anything that you'd like to leave, you know, our listeners, our viewers with, as we, you know, as we move forward, you know, and uh, knowing that there has been a big spike in cybersecurity threats, and we're now mostly online na, no, which makes us more vulnerable to ano to all these things, no.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point you've highlighted, Doc. No, I mean, this particular thing that this day and age that we are in, it's very dynamic. There's a lot of things happening, and one of the things also I've learned is that whatever we're working now might not be able to work tomorrow, right? So we really need to be vigilant about it, and it's a very good thing. Um, and also the challenge and opportunities are there, no? So regardless, whatever that may be, it will always be there. But thank you so much, Doc. No? I hope we've managed to give some relevant takeaways from this. And I just wanted to plug, or at least shameless plug, if you won't mind, our
Yeah, by
podcast.
all means, please
Yeah.
promote your podcast, and
Yes.
yeah, hope to join you again in one of those.
Yeah, of course. On season two, you are invited for that. But I would like to invite everyone to listen to our podcast. It's entitled Fin Circle, and it discusses about digital economy and also financial technology and anything related to that. You'll be able to hear that streaming on the following major podcast platform, particularly on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, also on Google Podcasts, Amazon, and also five major platforms in the US, particularly Breaker, Radio Public, Pocket Cast, Overcast, and Anchor.fm. So, yeah, I hope you'll be able to listen. There's a lot of interesting stuff that we've shared there, particularly this one. We basically have something to do with financial red flags as one of our episodes, and the ethical hackers, which the early part of season 1. So I hope you can listen to us. And thank you very much, Doc, for this opportunity.
Thanks a lot, Edgar. And again, no, to everyone, stay ethical, stay legal, don't do fraud. Let's just talk about it, no, so more people can get educated, no. So yeah. So thanks a lot. Hope to catch you again in another conversation.
Yep. Thank you.